is exceptionally hot here in London, and we have some exceptionally hot stories to discuss on the latest edition of The Front Page, the Racing Post news show that aims to bring you analysis, opinion and commentary. And the heat itself is one of our discussion points in this edition. Britain is experiencing an unprecedented heat wave, and British racing has responded in a number of ways, not least by cancelling fixtures on Monday and Tuesday. We'll be looking at racing's response to the soaring temperatures. Plenty of people have been getting hot under the collar about British racing's whip review and the seismic changes that will be implemented later this year as a result of the group's findings. But are they changes for the better or the worse? And finally, what about Newbury? The race that was meant to close the card at Newbury on Saturday turned out to be the race that never was, after owners and trainers mounted a prize money protest against one of British racing's biggest tracks. Was that action warranted? And what does it mean now and in the future for Newbury? Hello everyone, my name is Lee Mottershead, and I shall be the one who at the end of this programme determines which of the three subjects is going to be named our front page story of the week. To do that, I'm being joined by my Racing Post colleague, broadcaster and journalist Maddy, Playle, and for the first time from his air-conditioned villa in Ireland, David Jennings, our deputy Irish editor. And DJ, I have to warn you, if you go 4 minutes over your allocated time for this, you will be immediately disqualified. The floor, sir, is yours.
You may get somebody else, Lee. Late substitution, 4 minutes. I don't think I can do it.
You can. Crack on.
And as you can see from the sweat on my four chins, I have no air conditioning in this Dunshaughlin cottage. But great to be here and great to join you. Obviously the main story, in my opinion, and I think this is a foregone conclusion because it has been the story of the week. It is the whip review from the BHA. And I'm supposed to give viewers the core recommendations from the review were that the whip should be used for encouragement only in the backhand position, which is obviously a big move and might be hard for some viewers to understand, but we'll try and explain what that means. The permitted use of strikes is to be 7 on the flat, 8 over jumps, obviously in the backhand position only. And I like this one. I really like the next core recommendation, which is the development of a review panel, which is responsible for the evaluation of all rides and any necessary sanction or action, which I think is a fantastic move. I think that's really good. Next one is an increased penalties for offences, including double suspensions in major races when the whip is used above the permitted level. Again, I think that's probably a good thing. And then the final kind of core recommendation, disqualification introduced for offences in which the whip has been used 4 times or more above the permitted level in all races. So that's obviously going to be quite controversial. But overall, we knew this was coming. And I think that the general reaction from what I've seen is one of, okay, it's not quite as bad as I thought. And it seems to be quite a positive reaction. And I can see where people are coming from with that reaction, because I think we were kind of fearing the worst and we didn't really know how far this whip review was going to go. The whip review panel that was put in place, it was the best of the best. I think if you were to handpick people from the industry to be part of this review panel, I think pretty much all of us would have nearly put in the people who were involved. So it certainly was a quite rigorous review that was obviously done. My worry, and I go to my esteemed editor in Ireland, Richard Forrest's column on Thursday, in Thursday's Racing Post, which had the headline, "Whip changes have some merit in isolation, but are part of a worrying pattern." And I think he makes a valid point. I think those of us who think that this is going to be the end of changes to the whip are really wrong, because I do think this could be people say the start of the end. It's probably the middle of the end, because we've been through drastic changes over the years as well, and this is probably another massive change really in the way the whip is used and what is allowed, what's not allowed. And I suppose the one thing from Richie's column that I thought was interesting, he said he describes a survey that was done, I think it was Ipsos in the UK earlier this year did a survey, and it said it found that 22% of British people polled had an interest in racing, while another 23% had either no interest but didn't object to it at all, while a further 31% had no view on it at all. That equates to over 3/4 of those surveyed having no negative sentiment whatsoever towards racing, yet the BHA have been a sop for the minority cohort. So I suppose Richie's point is that we are trying to pander to people who have no interest in racing really, and I suppose that's his main worry, that that the whip is potentially on the way out, and whether that's a good thing or not, I'm not quite sure. I don't think it is. I think we will always need whip as in horse racing. I think we should educate people watching racing rather than people that don't know enough about it and are trying to voice their opinions. But it's a massive topic, Lee. It's a review which obviously people felt in British racing was needed. The core recommendations are read out for you there, and it is going to see a massive change in racing. We're only going to know when these come into play how much of an impact it's going to have on racing, and when these disqualifications take place. We obviously feel that there's going to be this big dramatic amount of disqualifications. I don't think it's going to be like that. I don't think it will have the massive negative effect in the opening weeks as people think it's going to have. And it's going to certainly be very, very interesting to see how it's played out.
DJ, just before go to you, Maddy, for your take on it. Obviously, you referenced there this view among some that British racing has been a sop to public perception, if you like. I suppose we should say this isn't just a British issue. If you go to America, you go to Australia, they're all having the same debates. They're all having that same soul searching. What about in Ireland? How has this been taken as a whole in Ireland, and what do Irish people think of British racing as a result? And could a similar journey be accelerated in Ireland as well, or is that just unthinkable there?
It's funny you say that. I don't think there is soul searching going on in Ireland. I think at the moment the whip is very much down the list of stuff on the agenda in Irish racing. I was actually on duty in Ireland on an Irish news shift when the details of the whip review came out, and I contacted the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Authority's communications manager, Niall Cronin, just to get an initial reaction to find out whether the IHRB were going to go down a similar route, either having a review or maybe bringing in some of these recommendations from the BHA. And it was a categorical no. Absolutely not. We have no interest whatsoever in, first of all, conducting a review, and then second of all, bringing in these changes. It is not part of their plan at all. And that seems to be the consensus in Ireland. It looks as though, at the moment anyway, and obviously things can change very, very quickly, but it looks as though they have no interest in going down the BHA's route.
Maddy, what's your take then on what the BHA has done? As I say, very different to Ireland, but in keeping with what's going on in places like America and Australia.
Yes, I agree with a lot of what DJ was saying. I think there's a balance, isn't there? It's hard to be 100% one way or 100% another way on something as divisive as the whip. If there is one thing I'm going to say, DJ mentioned there about the panel and the people on that panel, and it was mentioned in our paper last week. The key stakeholder, I guess, that wasn't necessarily directly consulted on that panel was punters. Yeah. You can say, oh, well, Nick Luck, for one, is I'm sure he enjoys a bet. But for me, this whip review, the most interesting thing about it is how it's going to impact betting. We might not see too many disqualifications. And as DJ said, I do think that sort of panel is definitely going to help the way this is communicated. But how are punters going to react, and how are bookmakers going to react? Are they going to be forced to pay out twice? Are they going to, deal with the terms and conditions of their bets differently? And I think punters have perhaps been a little bit left behind in this whole consultation. If I back a winner of even this year's Grand National and Noble Yates and he gets thrown out, how does that translate? And even again, you go down into the places. If I back a horse each way with 3 or 4 places and it finishes in, but the jockey went over and it gets disqualified, then I just don't get my money. So I'm really interested in how punters are going to be impacted by this. And I think with respect to DJ, that's one thing that he may have missed, is that this didn't really have an insight from the bookmaking and the punting side of things.
I think that's a fair...
I only had 4 minutes, Maddy. I only had 4 minutes. He had to be under strict writing instructions.
DQ. And actually, on that DQ point that you reference there, Maddy, that sort of, I think, is central to my take on on this. I think it's a subject where you can very easily see both sides of the argument. I think it's a subject that is just the direct opposite of one that should be conducted on as a debate on social media, because it's not a black and white issue. It's one where I can see the nuances in all the different positions, and I completely understand the take of those who have been very angered by what took place last week and see it as a sad day for the sport. I would say that I would have doubts about what this will do to the perception of racing, and I echo some of those points that DJ made about how interested people really are in this subject outside of the bubble. So I don't know what this will mean to how people perceive horse racing. However, I think if you put the perception argument to one side, if you put to one side the view of how this will change the way people look at horse racing, and you view it purely for what has been done, the two big issues, the backhand forehand thing. I'm not a horse rider. I've not sat on a horse for 15, 16 years, and I never used a whip, but I did sit on a horse because I'd looked to ride Wally if I tried. But I listened to PJ McDonald speaking last week, senior flat jockey, joint president of the PGA, and was a member of this review group, and he spoke of the journey he'd been on as they debated the issues. And in terms of that switch from forehand to backhand, or the banning of use of the whip in the forehand position, he stressed that he believes that for horses, using the whip in the backhand way is probably a better way of ensuring that horses aren't in any way discomforted by using their whip. He said that's just a fact as he sees it. And I think he's right in saying that racing will look a tidier sport. The aesthetics of a finish, I think, will be better with jockeys using the whip backhand, not forehand. And in terms of the DQs, on the one hand, I'd say that I don't think we'll get issues like Noble Yates winning the Grand National and being disqualified, because if jockeys know that if they go 4 strikes over, they're going to be thrown out, and the damage that will do to their owners and trainers.
It's Sir Mark Prescott and the David Ellsworth line of thinking, isn't it? If you make it harsh enough punishment, it will be sufficient as a deterrent.
And I think that's right. I think any jockey who lost a Grand National or Derby because they'd used their whip too much, that would be such a crime, and it would be such a needless crime that they would be pilloried, and it would be their fault. But I think in a wider sense, jockeys don't use the whip to try and relieve cramp. You know, they use the whip because they believe that each time they use it, they are improving their chances of their horse getting from A to B faster than would be the case if the whip wasn't used. Therefore, it is deemed by jockeys and by the sport to be a performance-enhancing piece of equipment. Therefore, it seems to me that if you're in a situation where a jockey who uses the whip within the rules loses a race, finishing behind a jockey who broke the whip rules, and won as a result, I think it's entirely warranted that horse is thrown out. In the same way that if a jockey breaks the interference rules, that horse is thrown out because the rules say that you can do one thing, you can't do another. The way I see it, this is just like that. And I'm not sure there wouldn't necessarily be uproar, because the rules clearly state if you use your whip 4 times more than the permitted level, you will be thrown out. That seems to me to be pretty easily understandable. I don't think it will happen anyway, but I think it will be fair.
Can I just ask you one question?
Yeah.
And I'm interested in both your answer and Maddy's answer to this, okay? Gold Cup, okay?
Yeah.
We'll use Lord Windermere as an example, okay? Just because it's the one that springs to mind. It was the one that wasn't travelling the race. It was a remarkable Davy Russell ride. I have no idea how many times he hit the horse. But I'm just, to give you an example, if there was, in the next 10 years, a Dino's Beano type character that turned out to be a grade 1 top staying chaser, okay? He's favoured for the Gold Cup, and he doesn't travel in the early part of his races, and he needs to be woken up in the early part of his races to get him into a jumping rhythm. And if, for argument's sake, we'll say, Brian Hughes or Nico de Boinville or somebody is riding this horse, and he has to try and get him interested in jumping and get him into the race, and he hits him 6 times in the first mile, okay?
Yeah.
So he's hit him 6 times inside the first mile to get him jumping, to get his concentration going, and to get a reaction from him, okay? He jumps jumps the second last in 3rd or 4th position, and he needs to get after him because he's a horse that does everything off the bridle. And halfway up the run, and he has hit the horse in total. He's hit the horse in total 11 times. So it's halfway up the run and he's neck and neck. He's hit him a couple of times in the early part of the race. He gets to his allocated amount of strikes halfway up the run in, and he says to himself, right, what am I going to do now? Am I going to hit the horse once more and be disqualified, but I'll win the race? Or will I just leave him and finish second? What happens in that situation?
I think the jockey has to accept that there are a number of times you can use the whip in a finish, and if he's used a chunk of his quota in the early stages because of what is in effect a failing of that horse, because that horse won't respond with that heavy driving in the early stages, well, I think in those circumstances I think it'd be pretty fair if the horse was chucked out. We should say that there will always be mitigation. Jockeys can say to stewards, well, look, I use the whip for this reason. But in that instance, if it is a really lazy horse, an Ingles Drever or a horse like that, Dino Spina that you referenced, DJ, and if you have to use the whip in those early stages, well, that is a problem with that horse in that sense. And if it means the whip can't be used later in the race, well, so be it.
Yeah, maybe not directly in this instance, but it's always an argument I find very interesting is on the flat anyway, and when this comes to longer term impacts, when you look at bloodstock, surely we want to be breeding from our horses that don't need the maximum encouragement, that are straightforward, that don't need to be hit over the number of times, that have that quality and have that sort of mentality that they can respond without their jockeys going over the limit. And that in turn will breed more straightforward horses and strengthen the breed. No? What do you think, DJ?
Yeah, I can see that point as well. And I'm not saying whether I think in that instance or that example that I gave, whether it's right or wrong that he should go over the permitted level. I'm just thinking there is going to be an instance in a big race where something like this might happen. Like in our heads at the moment, it's all very straightforward. And, you know, God, how could you possibly hit a horse more than 11 times? That's more than your quota and you're going 4 times over. But I just think there will, in the next decade, be an instance where there is a lazy horse or something goes wrong in the early part of a race and a jockey has used up their amount of strikes a lot more than they would want to, and they have less to give after the last. And if you have a horse that does respond to pressure, it's going to be a very tricky one. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I just thought I'd give the example because I think it is something that could crop up.
And of course, that certainly could happen, Maddy. We could have a situation whereby there is a high profile scenario in the coming years. I suppose my hope, and hope is a precious thing, that even if that does happen, the ramifications that come from it maybe won't be as severe as some people think. That then is our whip discussion sorted. What about the weather? Nobody dislikes talking about the weather. Maddy, Playle, what about you?
Yes, I'm going to talk about the soaring temperatures and what sort of implications that's had on the racing. And also this is a wider question of how British racing responds to problems, I guess. They might not be as big as the whip, but it still gives us an idea of how racing's being proactive in a semi-crisis, I suppose. Today we've got races at Cartmel, Ayr and Ballin Robin Island in the evening. Windsor and Beverley both cancelled tomorrow. Chelmsford, Southwell and Wolverhampton cancelled. And interestingly, Vichy race at midnight under the floodlights in France. But they're obviously a lot more accustomed to these high temperatures. We have been given a red warning, of course. Cartmel, for instance, today they're going to get up to about 28 degrees. So that's not the sort of high 30s, 40s we're seeing in this part of the world. And, you know, Ayr as well, similarly, they've hired cooling fans. Musselburgh on Tuesday is only going to be 29 degrees. So we're seeing courses, really this is an operational thing. Can you react to the heat by whether it's employing more veterinary staff, whether it's hiring those fans, whether it's the ability to reshuffle your races so that you can have the, you know, more testing races, if you like, earlier on in the day when it's not as hot. And I think the BHA made the right decision in choosing to call off those meetings where clearly those operational challenges could not be avoided and those areas of the country are going to be particularly hot. They need to have the right facilities, and if something would have happened on one of these tracks, then it would have been a very unfortunate and almost an own goal for the sport. And in this case, where they don't have the ability to sort of deal with it, we've been prevented from that happening. So I think that's a very wise move. And you've got to remember, it's not just racing in this heat. It's not just the couple of minutes you'll see on your TV screens of these horses running around the tracks. You know, they've got to be transported in horse boxes to the racecourse, often up and down the country. Some trainers are already making those decisions, and you know, they don't need to be influenced by the courses or BHA or anyone else. And staff as well. You know, in racing we have a lot of elderly among the workforce, or certainly older generations, and they are naturally more vulnerable when it comes to hotter weather. We can make those decisions as humans, but the horses can't, whether they can deal with it or not. So I think we've been proactive. Racing's done the right thing. Trainers are thinking ahead. For those who do think we're all overreacting a little bit to this, I would say something that was quite interesting. A couple of summers ago, when it was quite hot, I was in Newmarket at Hugo Palmer's yard, and he sort of made the point, yes, we'll definitely keep our eyes on it. We're going to be working them earlier and not doing any really strong pieces of work. James Tate's spoken out, himself a vet, about how he's adapting to this hotter weather, and of course all trainers will. But Hugo made the point that these thoroughbreds are, you know, descended from the Dali Arabian, who would spend its time in deserts and in very, very hot conditions. So this is something that horses, in his opinion, are capable of dealing with, perhaps better than humans in some ways. So that's just an interesting slant on it that I thought was quite interesting. But I do think we've made the right decision. These are really unprecedented times, unprecedented temperatures. And I want to throw to DJ first, actually, DJ, if I can, because on Friday, I'm using this as a good example of how we've managed this issue. But if there's a bad example, it probably came at Kilbeggan on Friday, where the stable staff protested due to the course charging €150 for bottles of water, and the staff at Kilbeggan have to walk roughly half a mile on their journey at the course. In Britain, I'm not really familiar with this, Lee. You go to a race course, you'll often see that there's water tanks on the bars, and you can help yourself to free water, which is great. But DJ, I think that was a big failing on Kilbeggan's part, wasn't it?
Yeah, two very, very important words here, Maddy. The first one is common, and the second word is sense. And how Paddy Dunnican and the team at Kilbeggan cannot have the common sense to see that stable staff should be given free water in soaring temperatures on a Friday night in Kilbeggan when they have to walk a half a mile from the stable yard to the parade ring is literally beyond me. It's beyond me. How much he reckons, okay, his point was, and it was in fairness to Mark Boylan, he did terrific work with this piece, which was in Sunday's Racing Post. I think it was on page 7. Like, his point was, we were giving them bottles of water, stable staff bottles of water, at a reduced rate of €1.50.
How much are they buying water for if that's a reduced rate?
That was exactly what Bernard Caldwell, who's chairman of the Stable Staff Association in Ireland, said. He said, I'd like to see where he's buying his water. But it's just like in this day and age where, like, we really want to avoid negative, you know, racing stories at all costs. And then you see something as stupid and ridiculous as this. It just absolutely infuriates me, so it does. How anybody cannot see that stable staff deserve free water. Like, they're not on absolutely massive money. They work huge hours. Like, free water at a race meeting in the conditions that they were in should be an absolute given. It shouldn't even be spoken about. We shouldn't be talking about it now. It drives me absolutely mental, Maddy.
DJ, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I don't know what it's like for the Irish media in your press room. I don't know what it would be like if you're working at Kilbeggan, but there wouldn't be a press room in Britain where a journalist was asked to pay for water. And if we get water for free, it would be unthinkable that stable staff doing a physical job wouldn't get their water free. You're completely right. It's racing shooting itself. It's Kilbeggan shooting itself in the foot, and it deserves all the rotten PR it's got as a result. In terms of the BHA and British racing on this one, it's very unlike the whip subject, in that it's what the BHA did in cancelling those fixtures does seem to have received a unanimously positive response. It was entirely the right thing to do. I don't think anyone.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's completely the right thing to do. The race courses involved haven't complained. The idea, as you said, of travelling a horse in soaring temperatures would be hideous to think about.
In the middle of the day as well,
Yeah.
at the hottest times of the day.
And one would also hope that where horses are racing across Monday and Tuesday and at other times on tracks where the temperature isn't going to be as high, but they're travelling from a hotter environment, you would hope that the trainers involved in those circumstances would say, well, no, we're not going to ask our staff to send those horses to Musselburgh or to Airweather because the weather, if they're in that sort of part of the country where it is that hot. Just in one more point on this one, I think it's a subject that has got potential wider ramifications, because I'm not Thomas Schaffernacker. I don't know what the weather's going to be doing in 5, 10, 15 years' time, but there seems to be a consensus of opinion that this is not going to be a one-off. This is where we're going. Look at the number of hottest days that we've had, certainly in this country. A lot of them have come in recent times. I think that will lead to questions being asked for racecourses, certainly in terms of when we stage races. I think this sort of decision will become more common. And I think you also have to say, in a wider sense, racing, like all sports, will have to meet environmental demands that until relatively recently haven't had to be considered. And I wonder if in the relatively short term, racecourses are going to have to ask, certainly with things like summer jumping, whether you can justify chucking tons of water on racecourses through the summer to stage summer jump races that very often attract extremely small fields, and you can argue for the greater good of racing PLC, are they doing that much good? Is that a reasonable worry, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the summer jumping and the viability of that long term is something that we discussed last week, of course, on the show. But I think for me, this is a talking point where we can actually praise the BHA and say, you know what, you've made a decision, you've given courses time to adapt if they can, and you've taken a vote and you've taken a view on this, and I think it was a very, very sensible one.
Unanimous praise for the BHA. All those watching from High Holborn, please note and remember this for future. So finally, we're going to end with a 1 mile 2 furlong fillies novice race at Newbury. An odd subject for discussion, perhaps, that we're talking about it because it didn't take place. Maddy, I bet you might even been thinking of having a bet in that race at Newbury on Saturday. And certainly the start of the week, there were 13 horses entered for this contest at Newbury. But on Thursday, when declarations had been made at 10 o'clock, when the cut-off point was reached, not one horse had been entered in the race, and headlines came out as a result. Rafe Beckett, who was one of the trainers who had a horse in the race and is also president of the National Trainers Federation, he insisted it wasn't a boycott per se, it was owners and trainers reacting to what they perceived to be poor prize money at Newbury. And it is more than a perception, it is a reality. This particular race had initially been programmed with £5,300 in prize money. That would have made it the worst race of its kind anywhere in Britain this year so far. The prize money was increased to £6,500. That still made it the joint second worst. One of the other ones was also staged at Newbury. What does this tell us about Newbury for the future and indeed now? I think it tells us that Newbury is a racecourse that has been publicly embarrassed by the sports participants. It's actually all very timely because James Stevens, our colleague, produced an excellent special report in the Racing Post last week that highlighted how Newbury's finances have been transformed by a house building project on the track, houses, flats that have made the racecourse look completely different to how it did before. They've really brought in a huge injection of cash into the business. But James also showed how prize money at Newbury from top to bottom has been heavily criticised by participants, and for good reasons, because in different sorts of league tables, Newbury's coming out very poorly. The race that we lost on Saturday was a low grade race in the sense that it was a fillies novice, not a pattern contest or anything like that. But if you look at pattern contest, Newbury also performs really poorly. Rafe Beckett referenced 6 furlong 2-year-old Group 2 contests coming up over the coming weeks. He showed how the Richmond Stakes at Goodwood is worth 150,000. York's Gimcrack Stakes is worth 250,000. Newbury's Mill Reef Stakes is worth only £90,000. If you look at Group 2 races over 7 furlongs coming up, Goodwood's Lennox Stakes is £180,000. York City of York Stakes is £400,000. Newbury's Hungerford Stakes is only worth £90,000. Same over jumps. So for years, Newbury's Grade 2 Cheltenham Festival trials, the Denman Chase and the Game Spirit Chase were run for £50,000. That went up to £60,000 this year. But 2 weeks earlier, Cheltenham staged the Grade 2 Cotswold Chase, like the Denman Chase, a Grade 2 Gold Cup trial. Denman was worth £60,000, the Cotswold Chase was worth £120,000. So it's no surprise.
Why is it?
Well, it's no surprise that participants are angry. Why is it? Okay, well, if you looked at what Newbury came out with in a finance statement earlier this year, they came out with some preliminary results that were really interesting. They pointed out the benefits of the house building project, and they stressed that because of that, and because crucially, actually related to prize money, because crucially of a new deal with Sky Sports Racing and the Racing Partnership that will kick in next year, they said prize money will be substantially increased from 2023 onwards. They also revealed that shareholders would take a £3 million dividend this year and dividends going forward in the future. But they stressed that as of next year, prize money will significantly increase. They also said that Newbury is now debt-free. So perhaps in the past, prize money has suffered because of debts at Newbury and because of its financial situation. That financial situation is now sorted. It seems to me that from now on, or certainly from next year onwards, there is no legitimate argument why Newbury can say that compared to similar major independent tracks
Group
like
1 tracks,
Goodwood and York
yeah.
and Ascot, why it can't compete with them on prize money. Yes, it's invested a lot of money in facilities for participants and crucially for the public, but in terms of prize money, Newbury has performed poorly for a long time. It's a really fantastic racecourse, stages great races, but it hasn't been competing on prize money. I think participants showed last week that they're not happy with that and they will take action. It seems to me that action was justified.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the sense that was a really poor race in terms of prize money. And I don't think it would be the only time they do that if Newbury doesn't change its approach to prize money. It's vowed that it will do. I think it has to.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't be debating that what the trainers and owners who voted with their feet and said no, we're not going to run because this represents a poor opportunity and poor prize money. I wouldn't be criticising them whatsoever. As you say, there are reasons for why Newbury might have fallen down on prize money, but for a Grade 1 track that was staging the Super Sprint and you know the feature events of last weekend to not do better, it's not good enough. In short. DJ, what do you think?
Yeah, and I actually feel sorry for racegoers, genuine racing fans who went to that meeting and had to put up with 6 races. And even the last race on the card, the race that Morgan Ferry won, only 5 runners in it. So and it was at 4:05. So their value for money was certainly decreased by the 7th race not happening. And then 5 runners in the 6th race. It just, as regards value for money for a race meeting, at a track, Newbury's a fantastic track. And I think for fairness, both over jumps and on the flat, it's one of the fairest tracks and one of the best tracks in either Ireland or England. And for this to happen and for this embarrassment to come on the track, it's just desperate.
DJ, I mean, obviously, we often talk about how prize money compares in Ireland to Britain. And actually, when you look at some of the top level races, the prize money is often very, very comparable. And the British races sometimes actually offer more money than comparable Irish races. But certainly at this level, at this sort of novice level, this entry level for racehorses, it would be unthinkable, wouldn't it, for an Irish maiden, Irish novice race to offer the equivalent sum of £6,500
Sorry, just to jump in as well, you're talking about, really well-bred fillies that have cost an awful lot of money to produce. So I think the prize money levels for this race in particular were appalling.
DJ, this wouldn't happen in Ireland, would it? This sort of race being run for this sort of money?
Oh, absolutely not. No, all you have to do is look at Ballinrobe this evening, Lee, and see the opening claimer, and it's as you would expect a claimer to be. It's 10,500. That's how much the race is worth. There's a maiden that follows that for 3-year-olds and upwards for 12,500. So there's a handicap later on in the card, a Monday night handicap at Ballinrobe, and it's worth 22,000. So prize money over here, certainly, you know, especially, you know, this evening at Ballinrobe is a chance for, I suppose, some of the smaller trainers. I don't think Aidan O'Brien has any runners on the card. It is a chance for the smaller trainers, potentially, yes, especially that 22 grand handicap. Like, it's a chance for smaller trainers to get a piece of the pie. And I think in essence, like some of those smaller races, the smaller handicaps, the claimers, I think over here the prize money is far superior.
I think as well, if you look at that particular sort of race that was lost there, a fillies novice contest. So later this week, Southwell stages a fillies maiden for £8,000 compared to Newbury £6,500 up money. Salisbury stages one on Saturday for £7,500. Foss Lass stages a fillies maiden on Monday, next Monday, for £8,000. Newmarket stages one on that Saturday for £9,000. So lots of tracks, top end, low end, are staging races of the same sort of race that Newbury lost for much more money. So I think this hopefully will be a very public wake-up call for Newbury. It's a track that does an awful lot of things right, to say, gets things right for the public. Point worth making too is 16,000 people came to Newbury on Saturday, primarily I suspect because of a Craig David concert. So they're still pulling in big crowds even without that seventh race, but this has to be a public wake-up call. And finally on this trip, I should just say that that race at Newbury that we lost on Saturday would have been called the Thank You Newbury Vaccination Volunteers Fillies Novice Stakes. Those vaccination volunteers didn't get a chance to be thanked in public at Newbury on Saturday with the race title, but it's happening now on this edition of the Front Page. And that ends our discussion of those three subjects, three really good subjects, Maddy and DJ. Maddy, the heat, the weather. I say we love talking about the weather. Really big subject, but I think the great thing is that racing actually got this one right, and hopefully it will get it right again. My own subject of Newbury, I think is really important because it highlighted a major issue at a major racecourse, and major action was taken. However, the whip is always going to trump most subjects because it's one of those issues that racing, sadly, I suppose, loves nothing more than to talk about. And what happened last week was a big development, certainly for British racing. And therefore, David Jennings, on your Front Page debut, you have the winning story, sir. Many congratulations. Many congratulations and to David. Thanks to David, thanks to Maddy, thanks to you for watching. No programme for you next week because of Glorious Goodwood, but Tom Kerr will be back in this chair the following Monday with more analysis, information, opinion, commentary on the hottest stories in horse racing. And hopefully by then as well, the temperatures will have dipped a little. See you soon.